The engine hummed softly as I turned onto Oak Ridge Drive, the familiar route to my son-in-law's house feeling oddly heavy that afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the quiet suburban neighborhood. I hadn't planned on stopping by. Brianna had mentioned she wouldn't be home, but something nagged at me. A father's instinct, maybe, or just the restless unease that had been creeping into my bones lately. Then I saw it. Parked boldly in the driveway, sleek and gleaming under the fading daylight, was Margaret's silver Lexus. The same car that should have been sitting in our garage while she was at work. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles whitening as my pulse kicked up a notch. There was no reason for her to be here. No reason at all. I pulled over a few houses down, killing the engine before I could second-guess myself. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the Lexus like it might reveal its secrets if I looked hard enough. But cars don't talk. People do. The walk to Dan's house felt longer than it should have. Every step was measured, deliberate, as if the ground beneath me might give way if I moved too quickly. The curtains in the front window were parted just enough, a sliver of light spilling onto the porch. I didn't knock. Didn't announce myself. Instead, I edged closer, pressing into the brick exterior, my breath shallow. And then I heard it. Margaret's voice, sharp and dripping with something I'd never heard in our 25 years of marriage. Contempt. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. The words hit me like a physical blow. I swayed slightly, bracing a hand against the wall to steady myself. Old fool. That was me. The man who'd built her a life most women could only dream of. The man who'd loved her without question. Dan's response was smooth, practiced, the same tone he used in courtrooms when he knew he had the upper hand. The timeline's perfect. File in June, claim irreconcilable differences. With the new Iowa statutes, you're entitled to half of everything acquired during marriage, plus spousal support for life. A laugh, Margaret's laugh, tinkled through the window. Once, that sound had been my favorite melody. Now it curdled in my ears. The construction business alone is worth $12 million. Add the rental properties, the vacation home, investments. We're looking at nearly $20 million total. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a conversation. It was a blueprint. A cold, calculated dissection of my life's work, reduced to dollar signs and legal strategies. Dan's voice dropped, smug. The beautiful part is his trusting nature. Alan has no idea we've been documenting his assets for months. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations, everything's already copied. He practically handed us the keys to his kingdom. A rustle of papers. A pause. Then Margaret, her voice laced with a cruelty I didn't recognize. 2 years of playing the devoted wife. Pretending to care about his boring construction stories, nodding sympathetically when he worried about payroll. God, the man actually believes I love him. The air left my lungs in a rush. I stumbled back, my heel catching on a loose stone. The scrape echoed louder than it should have. Inside, the voices cut off abruptly. Did you hear something? Margaret's whisper was sharp with alarm. Probably just the neighbor's cat, Dan replied after a beat. But his tone lacked conviction. I didn't wait to hear more. Back in my car, hands shaking, I fumbled for my phone and hit record. The screen blinked to life, a silent witness to the unraveling of my world. 25 years. A quarter of a century spent building, providing, loving, only to realize it had all been a performance. The front door creaked open. Margaret stepped out first, her designer bag swinging carelessly at her side. Dan followed, adjusting his tie with that infuriating precision of his. They froze when they saw me. Alan. Margaret's voice climbed an octave. What are you doing here? I forced a smile, the muscles in my face straining under the weight of the lie. Just finished a job site inspection nearby. Thought I'd stop by and see Brianna. Dan's eyes narrowed. He took a half-step forward, positioning himself subtly between Margaret and me. She's not here. We were just, Margaret faltered, then recovered with a brittle smile. I was helping Dan organize some legal documents for a client. The lie was so effortless. How many others had I swallowed over the years without question? I nodded, playing along. Thought you'd be at work until 6 today. Didn't you mention the Henderson proposal this morning? A flicker of panic. Left early. Headache. Sorry to hear that. I turned to Dan, feigning casual interest. Working on an interesting case? Asset division, he said automatically, then caught himself. For a divorce client. Very complex financial situation. The irony was almost laughable. Almost. Margaret's gaze darted between us. How long have you been here, Alan? Just pulled up. Why? No reason. Her smile was tight. You seem tense. Everything okay? The woman who'd spent months plotting my financial ruin was asking about my well-being. The absurdity of it nearly cracked my composure. Long day. You know how it is. I gestured toward Dan. Don't let me interrupt your work session. We were just finishing up, Dan said, his hand settling possessively on Margaret's lower back. The gesture was automatic. Intimate. How long had that been happening? Good timing, then. I pulled out my phone, making sure they saw it. Neither reacted, but Dan's eyes lingered on the screen. I should head home. Dinner won't cook itself. Margaret's laugh was strained. I'll be along shortly. Just need to wrap up a few things here. Take your time. I opened the car door, then paused as if remembering something. Oh, Margaret, Dr. Patterson's office called about rescheduling your physical. Said there was a conflict with your work schedule. Her face went blank for a split second, the look of someone caught in a lie. Then she recovered. Must be a mix-up. I'll call them later. No worries. These things happen. I slid into the driver's seat, my heart hammering. See you both later. As I backed out of the driveway, I watched them in the rearview mirror. They stood frozen until my car turned the corner, then immediately leaned in, heads bent in urgent conversation. The game was on. And for the first time, I held all the cards. The recording weighed heavy in my pocket as I drove away from Dan's house, the digital proof of betrayal burning like a brand against my thigh. The steering wheel felt foreign beneath my fingers, too smooth, too detached from the storm raging inside me. 25 years. Half my life spent building a future with a woman who'd been counting the days until she could dismantle it. I took the long way home, winding through streets I'd paved myself back when coal construction was just a beat-up truck and a dream. The familiar landmarks blurred past, the elementary school where Brianna had her first recital, the diner where Margaret and I shared milkshakes after late-night dates, the park bench where I'd proposed with a ring I'd saved 2 years to afford. Every memory now carried the acrid aftertaste of deception. The house loomed larger than usual when I finally pulled into the driveway, its brick facade glowing amber in the sunset. I'd built this place board by board in '95, back when Margaret's eyes still lit up at the idea of our future together. Now the windows stared back at me like the empty eyes of a stranger. Inside, the silence was oppressive. I moved through rooms filled with artifacts of a life I no longer recognized. The wedding photo on the mantel, Margaret radiant in ivory silk, me grinning like a man who believed in forever, the china cabinet stocked with dishes she'd insisted we needed but never used, the leather recliner she'd always hated but tolerated because it was the only thing I'd ever bought for myself. The office door creaked when I pushed it open. For 3 decades, this had been my sanctuary, the place where blueprints became homes and contracts forged futures. Now it would become my war room. I set the phone on the desk, the recording still paused mid-playback. My reflection in the darkened computer screen surprised me, the deep grooves around my mouth, the steel-gray hair Margaret used to joke made me look distinguished. The face of a man who'd been outmaneuvered in his own marriage. The first call was to Marcus Webb, my accountant for 15 years, the only person who knew about the Cayman accounts I'd set up during the '08 recession. Alan. Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker. You never call this late. I need a full asset review. Everything structured solely in my name, the offshore holdings, the equipment trusts, the Delaware LLC. A beat of silence. Then, quieter, this about Margaret? The fact he'd guessed so easily spoke volumes. She's been inventorying my assets with Dan Thompson. I want to know what she's missed. Marcus exhaled sharply. Christ. Give me 2 hours. While he worked, I pulled up every financial document I could find. Bank statements, property deeds, partnership agreements, all the paperwork Margaret had suddenly taken such an interest in over the past year. The paper trail told its own story. 3 unauthorized transfers to a joint savings account I'd never opened, $47,000 total, a sudden spike in credit card charges at high-end boutiques, $28,000 in 6 months, and, most damning, a $15,000 wire to an account under Dan's name labeled Legal Retainer. My fingers trembled as I cross-referenced dates. The wire transfer coincided with Brianna's birthday weekend, when Margaret had claimed she was visiting her sister in Minneapolis. The printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of financial autopsy. I barely noticed when my coffee went cold. Marcus called back at 9:47 p.m. "You've got $4.2 million offshore that doesn't show up on any domestic filings. The equipment trusts are another $1.8 million. And the Delaware LLC owns the intellectual property for your patented construction methods, worth about $3 million if you ever licensed it." Relief flooded through me. Nearly $9 million Margaret didn't know existed. What about the business itself? Coal construction's trickier. Iowa's a community property state, but I could hear papers shuffling. Your operating agreement has a clause that converts shares to debt upon divorce. Basically makes the company worthless for asset division. I'd forgotten about that provision, added during the 12 expansion. At the time, it had been about protecting the business from creditors. Now it might save me from my wife. "Send me everything," I said. "And Marcus." Not a word to anyone. The next call was to Mike Rodriguez, a private investigator I'd used on union disputes. His voice was gravel over the line. "Heard you retired, Cole. Need surveillance on 2 subjects. My wife and Dan Thompson." The pause lasted 3 full seconds. "That kind of job gets messy. Triple your usual rate." Mike arrived at dawn with a duffel bag of equipment. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Margaret had served Sunday dinners, and plotted our own counter-operation. "Thompson's got a pattern," Mike said, spreading photos across the maple surface. "Tuesdays and Thursdays, he leaves his office at 3:15, drives to the Marriott on 5th. Uses the south entrance, pays cash." The dates lined up with Margaret's book club meetings. My stomach turned. Get me proof. By noon, Mike had planted GPS trackers on both their cars and a voice-activated recorder in Dan's office. I spent the afternoon reviewing security footage from our home cameras. Margaret scrolling through my files when she thought I was asleep, Dan's Lexus idling down the street on nights she claimed to be working late. The smoking gun came at 4:12 p.m. Mike forwarded an audio file from Dan's office. Margaret's voice, husky with excitement. "Once the house sells, we'll have enough to buy that villa in Costa Rica. Just think, no more pretending to care about zoning permits or subcontractor drama." Dan's chuckle made my skin crawl. 6 more months of playing happy families. "You sure you can stomach it?" "Please," Margaret scoffed. "I've been acting for 25 years. What's another season?" I played it 3 times, each repetition carving the words deeper into my bones. Then I did something I hadn't done since my father's funeral. I cried. The sound of the garage door startled me upright. Margaret was home early. I swiped at my face just as her heels clicked across the marble foyer. "Alan!" Her voice carried from the kitchen. "Why are all the lights off?" I took a steadying breath and hit save on the audio file. "In here." She appeared in the doorway, backlit by the hall light. Even now, after everything, the sight of her knocked the air from my lungs. The way her auburn hair caught the last of the sunset, the familiar curve of her neck where I'd buried my face 1,000 times. "You look terrible." She frowned, setting her bag on the counter. "Are you coming down with something?" "Just tired." I gestured to the spread of papers. "Quarterly reports." Margaret's gaze flickered over the documents. Something like recognition flashed in her eyes before she masked it. "You work too hard." The hypocrisy was staggering. This woman who'd spent months plotting my financial ruin was chastising me for diligence. "I was thinking," she said casually, pouring herself a glass of wine, "we should update our wills. With Brianna married now, it makes sense to." "Dan's idea." The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Margaret's hand stilled. What? Seems like the kind of thing a lawyer would suggest. I kept my tone light. Especially one married to our daughter. She recovered quickly, taking a slow sip of Merlot. Actually, it was Linda Patterson. Her husband had a stroke last month, and I'll think about it. I closed the ledger with deliberate finality. Hungry. I could make pasta. Margaret blinked. I hadn't cooked for her in years. Sure. Let me just change first. As she climbed the stairs, I pulled out my phone and texted Mike. Need full financials on Linda Patterson's husband. Verify medical condition. The pasta boiled over while I stared at the bubbles, remembering our honeymoon in Tuscany, where Margaret had laughed as I burned our first attempt at carbonara. Had that been real? Or just another scene in her lifelong performance? Dinner was a surreal pantomime of normalcy. Margaret chattering about a neighbor's garden party, me nodding along while mentally cataloging her tells. The way her left eye twitched when she lied about the wine she'd had with lunch, Mike's tracker showed her at Dan's office from 1 to 3 p.m. The nervous tap of her fork against the plate when I mentioned running into Jim Morrison, who'd warned me about Dan's shady billing practices last month. I cleared the plates while Margaret scrolled through her phone, oblivious to the seismic shift between us. Upstairs, the shower ran. I used the noise to call Marcus. Found something interesting, he said. Margaret took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on you last year. Beneficiaries listed as the Margaret Cole Trust, a shell company registered in Delaware. The bathroom door opened. Steam billowed into the hallway as Margaret called, "Alan? You coming to bed?" "Gotta go," I whispered, hanging up. In our bedroom, her bedroom, really, with its lavender-scented sheets and vanity crowded with creams I'd paid for, Margaret stood wrapped in a towel. Time had been kind to her. At 52, she still turned heads at country club fundraisers. "You're being weird tonight." She studied me in the mirror as she applied moisturizer. "Everything okay at work?" "Just the usual." I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her nightly ritual, the precise strokes of the serum applicator, the careful dab of eye cream. How many of these movements were calculated? Was even her skincare routine part of the act? Margaret caught my stare. "What? Remember our first apartment? That leaky sink I kept promising to fix." Her hands stilled. "Where's this coming from?" "You used to leave me notes in the toolbox." "Love you, handyman." A shadow crossed her face, real emotion or just skilled improv. "That was a lifetime ago." Yeah. Back when I thought she meant it. I waited until her breathing evened out in sleep before slipping downstairs. Mike's latest email contained gold, security footage from the Marriott showing Dan and Margaret entering a room together on 12 separate occasions. The timestamps matched her dentist appointments and charity meetings. But the real prize came at 2:17 a.m., when my encrypted email pinged with Marcus's final report. Page 17 stopped me cold. A $1.2 million transfer from our joint investment account to an entity called Thompson Ventures LLC. The date: 3 days after Brianna's wedding. The pieces snapped together with brutal clarity. This wasn't just an affair. It was a full-scale financial heist, with Dan playing the long con and Margaret as his willing accomplice. And my daughter, my brilliant, kind-hearted Brianna, was the unwitting pawn who'd brought them together. I closed the laptop with a quiet click. Outside, the first hints of dawn tinted the sky. Somewhere upstairs, the woman I'd loved for half my life slept peacefully, dreaming of Costa Rican villas and freedom. Little did she know, the old fool had just checked her mate. The morning light cut through the blinds like a knife as I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the espresso machine Margaret had insisted we needed. $3, $800 for a machine she'd used maybe twice. The hum of the garage door opener told me she was leaving for her spa day, though Mike's latest text confirmed her Lexus was already heading toward Dan's office. I waited until her car disappeared down the street before pulling out the burner phone I'd bought yesterday. The first call was to Sarah Chen, my forensic accountant. "Alan," she answered on the first ring, "I've been expecting you." Sarah had handled 3 divorces for my senior project managers. She knew the drill. "How bad is it?" I asked, watching a squirrel raid the bird feeder Margaret had nagged me to install last spring. "Worse than we thought." Papers shuffled on her end. Margaret's been siphoning funds through dummy vendors, $12,000 last month alone labeled as landscaping services. And Dan. She let out a low whistle. The man's drowning in debt. 2 maxed-out credit cards, a failed real estate investment, and, here's the kicker, a $45,000 gambling loss at the Riverside Casino last quarter. The pieces clicked together. This wasn't just about greed. Dan was desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. Freeze all joint accounts today, I said. And pull every transaction from the past 5 years where Margaret's signature appears. As Sarah worked, I drove to Cole Construction's headquarters, the sprawling complex I'd built from a single leased warehouse. My employees nodded as I passed, oblivious to the earthquake about to hit their world. Jim Morrison, my CFO for 20 years, looked up from his computer as I entered his office. "You look like hell. I need the original partnership agreements. The ones from '98. Jim's eyebrows shot up, but he moved to the vault without question. The thick binder he handed me contained nuclear codes, the original operating agreement that made my shares non-transferable in the event of divorce. Margaret's lawyers would have a stroke when they saw this. Next stop, the county recorder's office. The clerk recognized me immediately. "Mr. Cole, here for the Johnson Street permits." "Property records," I said, sliding a folded 100 across the counter. "Everything under Daniel Thompson's name." 20 minutes later, I had gold. Dan had taken out a second mortgage on his townhouse last month. The lender, a shady private equity firm known for loan sharking. My phone buzzed with Mike's update. Subject 1 arrived at Subject 2's office. Audio recording in progress. I was halfway to my car when Brianna's name flashed on the screen. My stomach dropped. "Dad." Her voice sounded strained. "Can we talk?" The coffee shop near her clinic was nearly empty at this hour. Brianna sat in the corner booth, her usual caramel macchiato untouched. At 30, she looked so much like her mother. Same auburn hair, same sharp cheekbones, but her eyes were all mine. "Mom came to see me today," she said without preamble. "She says you're having episodes. Forgetting things. Getting paranoid." I nearly choked on my black coffee. "Did she give examples?" "Says you're accusing her of stealing." Brianna twisted her napkin. "Dad, she thinks you might be developing early onset." "Let me stop you right there." I pulled out my phone and queued up the most damning 30 seconds of the recording. Margaret's voice floated between us. 6 more months of playing happy families. "You sure you can stomach it?" Brianna's face went sheet white. "That's not all." I showed her the financial records, the hidden transfers, the dummy vendors, the life insurance policy. Watched as my daughter's world crumbled in real time. Her hands shook as she pushed the phone away. "Dan's involved. Up to his eyeballs." A single tear tracked down her cheek. "I introduced them. At our wedding." I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "None of this is your fault." Brianna sat frozen for a long moment. Then something remarkable happened. Her therapist training kicked in. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and met my gaze with terrifying clarity. "What's your play?" Over the next hour, we constructed our counterattack. Brianna would pretend to side with Margaret, gathering intel while wearing a wire. I'd continue documenting financial crimes. And we'd both wait for Dan's inevitable misstep, a man that deep in debt would get sloppy. Back at the house, I found Margaret humming in the kitchen, arranging fresh-cut peonies, her favorite flower, $85 a bouquet. "Good spa day?" I asked, pouring myself a scotch. "Divine." She didn't look up from the vase. "Ran into Linda Patterson. Her niece is getting married at the club next month. We should go." "Looking forward to it." The lie slid easily off my tongue. Margaret finally turned, studying me over the rim of her wine glass. "You're in a better mood. Solved a problem at work." I knocked back the scotch, savoring the burn. "You know what they say, every problem looks smaller once you have the right tools." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That night, while Margaret slept, I reviewed Mike's latest surveillance. The audio from Dan's office was crystal clear. They'd accelerated their timeline, planning to file for divorce next Monday. Margaret's voice dripped with anticipation. By this time next month, I'll be drinking margaritas on Alan's dime. I closed the laptop just as my encrypted email pinged. Sarah's final report included a bombshell. Margaret had withdrawn $200,000 from our home equity line last week. The destination: a Cayman Islands account under Dan's mother's name. The paper trembled in my hands. This wasn't just betrayal, it was grand larceny. At 3:17 a.m., my phone lit up with Brianna's text. Dan just left Mom a voicemail. He's desperate for cash, something about a bar association investigation. She's meeting him tomorrow at the usual place. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. The noose was tightening. When Margaret's alarm went off at 7 a.m., I was already dressed and making coffee. She blinked sleepily at me. "You're up early." Big day at the site. I handed her a mug, extra cream, no sugar, just how she liked it. "Don't wait up." As I pulled out of the driveway, Mike's van fell in behind me. We'd rehearsed this dance a dozen times. He'd handle the surveillance while I maintained plausible deniability. By noon, the trap was set. Brianna had confided in Margaret about concerns over my mental state, even producing fake medical records from a colleague. Margaret had swallowed the bait whole, immediately calling Dan to gloat. Their entire conversation now lived on Mike's recorder. At 2:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with Mike's triumphant text. "Got them on tape discussing the stolen $200,000. Dan's sweating, says the Bar Association subpoenaed his trust accounts." I allowed myself a single vicious smile before calling Sarah. Initiate Phase 3. The bank freeze hit at 3:30 p.m. sharp. Every joint account, every credit card, every line of credit, locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Tom Bradley himself had overseen the process, his voice grim over the phone. "Alan, some of these withdrawals are clearly fraudulent. We've notified the DA's office." Margaret's first call came through at 3:42 p.m. I let it ring out. By the time I pulled into the driveway at 6:15 p.m., the house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Margaret stormed out the front door before I'd even cut the engine. "What the hell did you do?" she shrieked, her manicured hands clawing at my jacket. "My cards are declined everywhere. The bank says." "I know what the bank says." I gently removed her hands. Funny thing about embezzlement, it leaves a paper trail. Her face went slack. For the first time in our marriage, Margaret Cole was speechless. I stepped around her, heading inside. "We'll talk after you've spoken with your lawyer." "Oh." I paused at the threshold. I imagine Dan's a little busy right now with his own legal troubles. The color drained from her face. Upstairs, I locked myself in the office and called Brianna. "It's done." Her exhale shuddered through the phone. "Dan just got served. The Bar Association's moving to suspend his license." I stared at our wedding photo on the desk, two smiling kids who had no idea what marriage really meant. "You okay?" "No." Her voice broke. "But I will be." As night fell, I sat alone in the darkened study, listening to Margaret pace downstairs. The foundation of our life together had crumbled, but the structure still stood, for now. Tomorrow, the real demolition would begin. The courthouse steps were slick with morning dew as I climbed them, my polished Oxfords clicking against the granite. Mike Rodriguez fell into step beside me, his camera bag slung over one shoulder, my insurance policy against whatever last-minute theatrics Margaret and Dan had planned. "Thompson's already inside," Mike murmured. "Looked like he hadn't slept in days." "Good. Let him squirm." The family court waiting area smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Margaret sat stiffly beside her new attorney, a shark-eyed woman named Linda Hawthorne who'd made her reputation dismantling wealthy husbands. Margaret's cream-colored suit and demure pearl earrings were carefully chosen, the uniform of the wronged wife. She didn't look at me as I passed. Dan lurked near the water fountain, his usually impeccable suit rumpled. Dark circles bruised his eyes, and his fingers twitched at his sides like a gambler's. The Bar Association's investigation had clearly taken its toll. "Alan." Brianna appeared at my elbow, her therapist's composure firmly in place. "You ready?" I squeezed her hand. "Let's finish this." The bailiff called our case at 9:17 sharp. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided, a no-nonsense jurist known for eviscerating perjurers. As we took our positions, I caught Margaret whispering frantically to her lawyer. Whatever she said made Linda Hawthorne's mouth tighten. "Mrs. Cole," Judge Hendricks began, adjusting her glasses, "you've petitioned for an emergency restraining order and temporary spousal support. Please state your reasons." Margaret stood, her hands trembling just enough to sell the performance. "Your Honor, my husband has become increasingly controlling. He's frozen all our accounts, leaving me unable to pay basic living expenses. I fear for my safety if—" Objection. My attorney, James Morrison, didn't bother rising. "We have evidence Mrs. Cole's claims are part of a premeditated fraud scheme." The judge's eyebrows climbed. "Evidence?" James connected his laptop to the courtroom's AV system. The recording from Dan's office boomed through the chamber. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." Margaret's porcelain complexion turned ashen. Dan lunged forward, his lawyer yanking him back as Margaret's voice continued. 2 years of playing the devoted wife. God, the man actually believes I love him." Chaos erupted. Linda Hawthorne demanded a recess. Dan shouted about illegal recordings. Margaret simply stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. Judge Hendricks' gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Enough." She let the recording play to its damning conclusion, then fixed Margaret with a withering stare. "Mrs. Cole, you understand these proceedings are under oath?" Margaret's mouth worked soundlessly. James handed up a thick binder. "Your Honor, we've documented Mrs. Cole and Mr. Thompson's conspiracy to defraud my client, including embezzlement of marital assets and fraudulent life insurance policies." The next hour unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Sarah Chen testified about the hidden offshore accounts. Mike presented surveillance footage of Margaret and Dan's hotel trysts. And when Brianna took the stand, calm, measured, heartbreakingly professional, even the court reporter paused to wipe her eyes. "Mrs. Cole," Judge Hendricks said icily, "you have 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't refer this matter for criminal prosecution." Margaret's mask finally shattered. "It wasn't supposed to," Dan said. She whirled on Dan, her manicured finger jabbing the air. "You told me it was foolproof." Dan's chair screeched as he stood. "This is bullshit. Those accounts were marital property." "That's enough." The judge's voice could have frozen lava. "Petition dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Thompson, consider yourself under contempt warning. And Mrs. Cole." She removed her glasses. "You just perjured yourself 6 ways from Sunday." The gavel fell. Outside, the midday sun felt like absolution. Reporters swarmed the steps, but Mike and James formed a barrier as I guided Brianna to my car. Margaret emerged minutes later, sunglasses hiding red-rimmed eyes, Linda Hawthorne hissing in her ear. Our gazes locked across the parking lot. 25 years reduced to this silent standoff. Then Margaret lifted her chin, that same defiant tilt I'd fallen for at the company Christmas party in '87, and turned away. The divorce proceedings that followed were anticlimactic. With a prenup and criminal exposure hanging over her, Margaret settled for a fraction of what she'd planned. The Lexus, a modest condo, and enough alimony to maintain appearances but not the lifestyle she'd coveted. Dan fared worse. The Bar Association revoked his license after 3 contractors testified about misappropriated funds. Last I heard, he'd moved to Omaha to work as a paralegal. As for Brianna, she filed for divorce the same day and threw herself into rebuilding her practice, specializing now in narcissistic personality disorders, a decision that made me both proud and sad. Tonight, 6 months after the verdict, I sit on the deck of the lake house Margaret always hated, watching the sunset paint the water gold. The paperwork came today, the final decree, the last signature, the official end of something that died long before I noticed. My phone buzzes with Brianna's nightly check-in. All good. I snap a photo of the sunset and hit send. All good. The grill sizzles as I flip the steak, the aroma mingling with pine and lake water. Somewhere in the distance, a loon calls, a lonesome sound, but not an unhappy one. I raise my glass to the darkening sky, to new beginnings, to lessons learned, and to the quiet understanding that sometimes the greatest victories aren't what you gain, but what you finally let go. The steak is perfect. The beer is cold. And for the first time in years, the silence feels like peace.